Imagine you're playing mini golf, but instead of being able to see the ball and all the obstacles, you have to hit the ball while blindfolded. The good news is you have some help. There's another person who's going to talk you through the swing and the kind of force you need to use to hit the ball and all the other obstacles in the way and the way you're going to aim the ball. But if you make a single mistake and you don't get a hole in one, the other person talking you through this dies. If you think this sounds far fetched, this is what artillerymen do every day. Now, artillery is basically any weapon that fires a projectile beyond visual range. But it wasn't always like this. For centuries, artillery was always used within visual range of the target. Original artillery cannons were called bombards. They were mainly used as siege weapons and they weren't very portable. You had to drag them everywhere. But during a siege, you didn't have to be mobile. By the Napoleonic era, you had cannons that were mounted on wheels that could be moved by horseback. And now this became such a decisive factor on the battlefield that artillery became its own profession, along with the infantry and the cavalry. Now, the 1880s showed great advancements in metallurgy and recoil systems and communication. So now, for the first time, you could have artillery firing beyond visual range, where it was guided in by special people on the ground who were communicating back to the artillery using signal flags or telegraph. Now, we've all watched movies where they call in artillery, and I'm sure you played video games where you pick a point on the map, and a few seconds later, the artillery strike is inbound and explodes the map. But how does it actually work in real life? When you call for artillery, what sequence of events occurs that actually brings that artillery to you? I have to stop and pay the bills for a moment. This video is sponsored by Atlas VPN. Click the link in the description below. You'll get Atlas VPN for 82% off. That's a 3-year plan for $199 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. A VPN, or virtual private network, helps you stay safe online by creating a secure tunnel from your computer to the VPN provider that hackers and rogue members of the government can't penetrate. I personally use Atlas VPN because I've received threats due to the open source intelligence work I do. So use what I use and click that link in the description below and you'll get Atlas VPN for 82% off. A 3-year plan for only $1.99 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. You can't beat it. Thanks for sticking with me. So what happens once that call is made? Well, the answer to that is this incredible mix of muscle power and math, all performed by incredible young soldiers who never even see the target they're shooting at. Now, an artillery battalion consists of about 800 soldiers or Marines, and they're further divided into subunits of roughly 150 soldiers or Marines called batteries. Now, these batteries typically contain 6 guns, and they're further divided into 2 platoons of 3 guns each. Let's take a look at a single section of M777 towed howitzer artillery, the kind that was just donated to Ukraine and is also in use by American, Canadian, Australian, Saudi Arabian, and Indian armed forces. Now, every nation is a little bit different, and there's even some subtle differences between the US Army and the US Marine Corps. But for the most part, this is how a towed artillery platoon works. You have a gun and you have a prime mover. This is the vehicle that actually moves the gun, and usually the troops ride on that vehicle. Then you have an ammunition vehicle. This vehicle holds all of the rounds, and there's usually a trailer which holds the propellant and the fuses. Each gun is serviced by 8 to 10 crewmen. Now let's break those crewman roles down. You start with the section chief. This soldier or Marine is the most experienced crewman on the gun, and their entire job is to make sure that all operations on that gun are being conducted safely and by the book. Then you have the gunner and assistant gunner. The gunner stands on the left and he's responsible for deflection. That means which way the gun points, right or left. The assistant gunner is on the right, and the assistant gunner is responsible for quadrant. That means which way the gun is pointing up or down. Then you have the ammo team chief, or ATC. This soldier or Marine is responsible for the inventory and distribution of rounds, of fuses, and of propellant, which in artillery parlance is called charges. Then you have cannoneers number 1 through 5. These crewmen have different jobs on the gun, everything from physically loading the round to loading the charges to swabbing the gun with a big wet Q-tip so that way no embers are remaining in the gun when you load it again. So that's the gun team, but they don't exist in a vacuum. There's also another section in the platoon called the FDC, or the Fire Direction Center. Think of them as the brains of the operation. These are the guys who receive the missions from the observers in the field, and then they do the math to calculate the deflection, quadrant, fuse type, and ammunition type, and get that fire mission out to the guns. Oftentimes, the FDC calls this charts and darts, although they don't really use physical charts and pins and a map anymore, although they can if there's a degraded condition. A lot of times these days, they calculate the fire mission on a computer and they send the mission out to the guns by computer. Now, once the FDC sends the mission to the actual gun line, if the gun line is in a degraded condition, meaning their computers aren't working, they can use a special sight called a collimator or aim at a special kind of post and adjust off this aiming post. But for the most part, they'll use computers as well. Now, the FDC also tells the gun line what kind of fuses to use. This is very important because different kinds of fire missions require different kinds of fuses. If you're shooting at a bunker, you might need a fuse that's designed to penetrate and then explode. If you're shooting at troops in the open, you might want the shell to be timed to airburst 20 meters above the ground. That way you get maximum disbursement of the shell fragments. That's right, the FDC knows how long it takes for a shell to travel 13 kilometers so that it explodes 20 meters above the ground. They can set a timer that will do that. These guys are good. So now that you know everything works, take a field trip with me a little bit north of Kamdesh in Afghanistan in 2010. A platoon of infantrymen are on a mission to find an anti-coalition supply cache when they take contact coming from the forest.
I'm gonna go ahead and shoot! Shoot! You see somebody? No.
They're taking accurate rifle, machine gun, and RPG fire from defenders who are dug in inside the forest. The platoon just can't gain fire superiority over them, but they do have an ace up their sleeve. One of their members is a forward observer. This is a soldier or Marine who is specially trained and knows how to call an artillery fire. The forward observer keys his radio mic.
Red leg, this is Boardwalk. Adjust fire, over.
Back at the FDC, they answer the call.
Boardwalk, this is Red Leg. Adjust fire, out.
Grid, Yankee, Echo, 1, 2, 3, 2, 5, 0, over.
Grid, Yankee, Echo, 1, 2, 3, 2, 5, 0, out.
Altitude, 2, 5, 8, 0 meters, over.
Altitude, 2580 meters, out.
Enemy infantry platoon under tree cover, 1 round, immediate suppression, over.
Enemy infantry platoon under tree cover, 1 round, immediate suppression, out.
Now let me break this down for you.
Red leg, this is Boardwalk. Adjust fire, over.
This is a warning message coming from Boardwalk, who's the forward observer, going to Red Leg, who's the Fire Direction Center, or FDC. This is a notification that Boardwalk needs Red Leg to fire 1 round to adjust, meaning Boardwalk is going to observe the impact of that round and send corrections back to the FDC so they can fine-tune where that round is landing. The FDC always reads back everything that the forward observer sends.
Grid, Yankee, Echo, 1, 2, 3, 2, 5, 0, over. Altitude, 2, 5, 8, 0 meters, over.
Now Boardwalk is sending Red Leg the location of the target and the altitude of the target. It's obvious why they're sending the location of the target. The gunners need to know where to shoot. The altitude is sent in case the FDC needs to calculate an airburst. They want to make sure the airburst occurs above the ground, not above sea level. Now, most of the time, the forward observer is going to send the grid location of the enemy, but there's a couple of other ways the forward observer can send information to the guns. They can use shift from a known point, which is a known target reference point that both the FDC and the forward observer know, and they just say, hey, either fire directly on that target reference point or shift right or left of that target reference point. They can also give their location and then send a direction and a distance from their location.
Enemy infantry platoon under tree cover, 1 round, immediate suppression. Over.
Now the FO is giving a target description, a method of engagement, and a method of fire and control. The FDC needs to know the target information and description because they're going to choose how best to engage that target based on the types of fuses and ammunition that they have available. And immediate suppression means that troops are in contact and that first adjustment round needs to go out as fast as possible. Now that the message is complete, the FDC works their magic and starts doing the math. I'll let Captain Preston Stewart, Army Artillery Officer and owner of warstories.co, explain to you what happens next in the FDC.
All right, fire mission comes into the FDC, it's go time. So ideally, the FDC crew has everything set up to where it takes very few steps to actually calculate the firing data, transmit that to the gun line so they can send the round downrange. Most of those calculations will be done on something called an AFATIS, Advanced Field Artillery Tactical Data System, or box. It's a fancy computer. Usually an FDC will have a primary and a backup AFATIS because computer issues happen, usually at the worst time. And they might even have a manual option, what Ryan talked about earlier, charts and darts. Now, the FDC isn't starting from scratch when that fire mission comes in. They'll spend time building out the database. That includes things like the exact location of every gun they can send the fire mission to, quantity and type of ammunition each gun has on hand, maybe observer location or even fire support coordination measures, essentially where they can and can't fire. So the operator takes the relevant data from the call for fire, plugs it into the AFATIDs, and out comes what we call the firing solution. The data needed to transmit to each one of the guns to execute the fire mission. Depending on the weapon system, you could send that data digitally through AFATIDs or pick up the radio and call the gun line, at which point the FDC transmits exactly the information needed to execute that mission. No more, no less.
So the FDC is now finished with their calculations. Now they know the deflection, they know the quadrant, they know the type of charges they need to add, they know the fuse type. All that information is sent over to the guns. Now, this firing solution is normally sent to the guns over a computer network, but this can also be sent to the ammo team chief over a radio, and the ammo team chief will relate this information to the gun chief. And the gun chief starts the mission by saying,
Fire mission. Platoon adjust. Number 1, 1 round. Shell HE. Lot Alpha Golf. Charge 2 Lima. Fuse PD. Deflection 3024. Quadrant 247. 2 rounds in effect.
Now here's what all this means.
Fire mission. Platoon adjust. Number 1, 1 round.
Remember how a platoon has 3 guns? This is the warning to the platoon that gun number 1 needs to fire an adjustment mission of 1 round.
Shell HE. Lot Alpha Golf. Charge 2 Lima. Fuse PD.
Shell HE means a high explosive shell. This is to differentiate the kind of shell from a white phosphorus shell or a guided shell. Lot AG is the lot number of the shell. Think of it like a batch number. That way, if the shells that are being fired aren't exploding correctly, the FDC knows, hey, stay away from lot AG. It's a bad batch. Let's use a different batch. Charge 2 Lima means the amount of propellant. Propellant charges come in bags that are roughly the size of toilet paper. The more propellant you put into the gun, the further the round is going to travel. Rear end of the propellant charge has a red backing. That lets you know that you put it in the correct way. Fuse PD means the shell is set with point detonation. In this case, it's going to penetrate the trees before it impacts and explodes on the ground. You can set fuses with all kinds of different detonation options. You might want it to penetrate and then explode. You might want it super quick so that if it hits a leaf, it explodes, or you might want a timed detonation that explodes a couple meters above the ground.
Deflection 3024. Quadrant 247. 2 rounds in effect.
Deflection 3024 is the bearing to the target, the left-right direction where you want to point the gun so that it's pointing at the target. And that number isn't in degrees, it's in another kind of measurement called mils or milliradians. Okay, well, you know, on a circle there's 360 degrees. Well, artillery fires at such long ranges that if you were to use degrees, the artillery fire would be too inaccurate because there'll be spaces in between those degrees, especially at long range. So the Army uses a finer unit of measurement called milliradians, and there's 6,400 milliradians in a circle. This allows for a much more precise unit of measurement when aiming artillery, and a milliradian is 1 meter at 1 kilometer. Now, quadrant 247 is the angle that they're going to place the artillery piece at. Finally, 2 rounds in effect is the preparatory command for the 2 other guns in the platoon that aren't firing to get their guns ready to fire 2 rounds in effect once gun number 1 gets shells on target and the firing solution is confirmed. Now begins a ballet of chaos. I'm going to describe the process of firing the gun, but a lot of things are going on concurrently. Now, on an M777 Howitzer, the gunner is on the left side of the gun, and he grabs a wheel and starts turning that wheel to get that gun moving left or right. Meanwhile, the assistant gunner is on the right side of the gun, and that guy is moving another wheel to get the gun elevated correctly to the correct quadrant. While all this is going on, the ammo team chief is fusing the rounds. Now, a 155 millimeter artillery round weighs about 100 pounds, 45 kilos. Think of it like carrying 2 large bags of dog food. Good news is I don't have to carry the rounds that far. The distance from the ammo truck to the gun is about 3 to 5 meters. So the number 4 cannoneer is going to walk over to the ammo team chief. He's going to take that completed round and he's going to bring it over to the gun. There, the gun chief is going to inspect the ammunition, make sure it's the correct shell, the correct fuse, the fuse is set correctly. When satisfied, the number 4 man is going to drop that shell onto the loading tray. Then the number 4 man and the number 5 man are going to take a long J-shaped pole and ram that round into the breech of the gun. Once the round is seated inside, the assistant gunner lifts up the loading tray to get that loading tray clear of the gun's recoil. Remember, this is a charge 2 Lima fire mission, so the number 3 man is going to go and get 2 green charges and bring those over to the section chief to verify. Once the section chief verifies those charges are correct, the number 3 man is going to push those charges inside the gun. And if you've ever wondered why the charges don't fall out again, there's a groove inside the breech of the gun to make sure the charges don't tumble back out. So he's going to push those charges in and stand back and say,
"All clear! Bring the rear!"
if they're in the Army, and
I see right there!
if they're Marines. The breech is closed and the crew waits for the command to prime from the gun chief. Now, the primer is basically the size of a copper shotgun shell. It sits in a magazine of 10 primers on the side of the M777 Howitzer. The primer is the explosive charge that will detonate the propellant inside the gun. When the gun chief says, "Stand by!" a crewman will step back, prime the gun, and announce,
"One on white! Witness marks line!"
This indicates that the breech is closed, the primer is seated, and the gun is ready to fire. The lanyard is hooked up to the lanyard lever, and the crew waits for the command to fire. The gun is now ready. The section chief of Gun 1 calls up to the FDC, Gun 1 ready. Meanwhile, the section chiefs of Guns 2 and 3 call back Laid 2, Laid 3, letting the FDC know that they're aiming at the target, so when they're told to fire for effect, they can do so. When the FDC tells the section chief to fire, the section chief will tell the number 1 man to fire. The number 1 man will grab that lanyard and will slowly twist his body to the left in a smooth motion. This fires the gun. Once that round is fired, the gun section will report,
Shot 1. Rounds complete on 1.
the round is on its way downrange. Now the FDC needs to let the forward observer know that they just got the first shot of the mission off.
Boardwalk, this is Redleg. Shot, over.
Redleg Boardwalk, shot out.
When the round is 5 seconds away from impact, the FDC calls the FO to let them know they have to get their heads down.
Boardwalk, Redleg. Splash, over.
Redleg Boardwalk, splash out.
The round is close, but not on target. It lands 50 meters below where it's supposed to be. So the forward observer calls back up to the FDC, tells them to add 50 and fire for effect. This means all of the guns are going to shoot in a continuous barrage.
Red leg boardwalk, add 50, fire for effect, over.
Boardwalk, red leg, add 50, fire for effect, out.
The calculation is corrected and sent out to the guns from the FDC. Now the guns are going to fire in a continuous barrage, 2 rounds per gun, as fast as safely possible. They're still checking everything, round type, fuse type, charge type, making sure the gun is still laid on correctly. When all of the rounds are fired, the FDC will call back to the FO.
Boardwalk, red leg, rounds complete, over.
Roger that, red leg, rounds complete, out.
The rounds are in the air. The splash warning comes over the radio again, and the rounds start to impact.
Boardwalk, red leg, splash, over.
Red leg boardwalk, splash out.
This is where a soldier or Marine would call repeat over the radio if they needed the FDC to run that fire mission again. This is why you never hear a soldier say repeat if they don't understand what you're saying. Instead, they say again. If no repeat is needed, the FO ends the mission by calling the FDC and saying,
Red leg boardwalk, end of mission, estimate 10 casualties, over.
Boardwalk, red leg, end of mission, estimate 10 casualties, out.
artillery conquers and infantry occupies. And after the artillery barrage, the infantry might walk through that area and check the bodies or what's left of them for any sort of intelligence. The decisiveness of the artillery and the cannoneers have won the day again, as it has since Napoleon's time, when artillery was the final argument of kings. This video is probably my most ambitious video so far. It took about a month to research and create and produce, and I had the help of multiple soldiers and Marines. So special thanks to Specials Jack Carrol, Sergeant Dietrich Culley, Sergeant Christopher Lamb, and Captain Preston Stewart. Captain Preston Stewart, he runs warstories.co. Go to his website. You can find it in the description below. Thank you so much, all of the other Marines and soldiers who want to remain anonymous, and thank you, especially to you, the viewer, for watching.